future.
It's easier to kind of pretend to do this than it is to actually do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's entrepreneurship.
That's you fake it till you make it, then you make it, then you gotta like keep trying to push the measure, right? Like
That's the hard part.
that's literally like it's wild. Like that's how you start. But I think like now that we do know, you should be able to pass that on to the next like batch of people. Because I think sometimes we become so like dispatched from everyone, and like everyone thinks like you got it figured out from the very beginning. No, you don't. Like you don't have it figured out. Like you only realize the more you talk with others, like be in an ecosystem where people are talking, like you're like, oh, like everyone is like trying to fake it.
Yeah.
And like we eventually all become like pieces of a puzzle that like is fully built in the future. Like this is what it's gonna be. But where it started is not.
But it's like, when do you know that you're actually doing what you should be doing? Because I think it's easy, like in the beginning, all you're doing is playing, technically, right?
Yeah.
And I heard this term today, playing business,
Yeah.
where you're not necessarily actually doing anything. You're just like kind of curious about building something.
Yeah.
But then when do you actually realize, okay, wait, I'm actually doing something and like there's actually something happening here?
For me, it's more when you understand the clarity, like when you have clarity of what it is you should be doing. And really, you are playing business, right? It's like, there's a quote I heard where it says, you don't have a business with a purpose, you have a purpose that has a business, right? So once you have clarity on what that purpose is and where the mission is going, then it helps you so much more easier figuring out like, okay, this part of the business may have not worked, but like you're still focused on doing the purpose.
Yeah.
And that for me is when you have that clarity of what that purpose is and how you impact that purpose every single day, every single week, every single quarter, and run those numbers and be able to say, okay, this bottom line purpose is where we're solving it for.
Do you remember the first time you were building something that had that sort of purpose and business sort of link?
Yeah, it was Foonda. Foonda Africa was definitely that. But I think it took a long time before we actually realized like, oh, like this is actually the purpose of what we're actually building. Like at the beginning, because you're trying to solve this big problem and you don't really be able to articulate that, right, very clearly. It took about, I think, till last year really, when we had to pivot at a certain stage, go back and figure out what it is exactly we were trying to solve and address for, and then go back to realizing what that bottom line metric was. Hey, like young people placed into opportunities was what we were all about. And by virtue of us doing that, we make business profit. Okay, like that made sense. Okay, cool. You make money by helping people get placed. Okay, cool. Now our purpose is at the center of you making money. Now I can actively think about the business plan and the business model that fits that, right?
Yeah.
So for us it was at that point, like sometime last year when we were like, oh, actually, this is what our purpose metric is, and by virtue of us doing that purpose metric, this is how we make money on top of that.
You know, let's go bare bones basic. You know, what is Foonda and what were you guys trying to achieve?
So Foonda is an early talent recruitment startup. What we do is help companies hire top talent from Africa with the focus of trying to break barriers to better futures for young Africans. What that means is we work with universities, talent developers, talent accelerators, and what we do is help bridge this gap between them and the companies that can get them. How do we help them find opportunities easier and break this barrier of asymmetrical information, and also help companies open up the opportunities to a wider audience without the hassle of having to work harder by 10xing the number of people that apply. So we've built a recruitment solution for companies that can help score and screen candidates. But at the same time, we've made it more accessible for people to be able to apply through their mobile devices as opposed to going to a computer shop or whatnot to apply for these opportunities. So that's what Foonda does, is bridge the gap between the two.
What was the problem that you sort of identified? And like, I don't think it always happens so like beautifully where, you're walking on the street and then you trip and then you realize, oh, damn, people should wear mouth guards. You know, it's like, I know that's a shitty example, right? But like, sometimes when people talk about the problems that they're solving, it's like this beautiful, like, sequence of events that just led to you realizing that, oh man, the world needed to change in this way. Was there something that really like was a catalyst for you guys?
Yeah, for us, it was. I mean, I worked in the rural development space from a private sector perspective, working with rural communities and helping. My role was really to, help this macadamia farm that we were working on become a catalytic project for people in that space, right? So what that meant is like this project was going to take 6 to 9 years to break even and give money, and for a long time it will do, but the impact that needed to be realized was sooner. Right, and what my role was then, go and help the youth and women in these places find other ideas and launch new ventures that can use this project to launch. Right, so then you try to communicate and do funding applications for 15,000 people, and you realize, hey, there's going to be a company that wants to come and meet everyone. How do you get the message across, right? If you want to get documents for applications, how do you do that? We built a WhatsApp network of communication and realized, hey, in these places, a lot more people have smartphones than they do have PCs and computers anywhere close by. So this was a nice way to think about how to help people apply for things. But I think, again, my story has always been about how it was a youth development thing. Feesmas 4 was the big one where the idea came, but I think after having worked and realized my passion in technology and how it could really help make things simple, was the catalyst that said, hey, this is the way in which to address the problem you've always wanted to solve, and helping young people was always that.
So you find this like really good problem that you think, okay, if we do something here, it could be super impactful. What's the first step to building out a platform to actually be able to facilitate, solving this problem?
Yeah, building out a platform. Don't run to the nearest software shop. Don't run to the nearest dev shop. I think that was the biggest mistake we made. I was like, yo.
Can you explain what a dev shop is to someone that might not know what that is?
So a dev shop is like these, I'm not frowning upon any dev shops. I hope anyone who's listening doesn't, look at that. But again, a dev shop is really like a company that has a whole lot of software developers and provides a consultancy service to developing your solution, right? Much quicker than you having to build out your own team. So, they work with you, they get your idea, they help you think through it, and then they develop it, right? For a lot of money, right? That's X amount of software developers, it'll be 40 hours of their time plus the markup for them. And they just essentially manage that whole process for you of developing your thing without you having to do it yourself.
Why do you feel like it was such a big, it didn't work for you guys?
Because it was too soon. It was too soon in our journey. We still had a lot to really, as a team, figure out, and we had to really engage more with the customer. And also, truth be told, the solutions we need to address the problems we're looking to solve don't cost that much. They aren't as complex as we tend to think at the beginning. I remember myself at the beginning on some hey, I have an app idea. I have an idea for an app. My idea is for an app. No, an app doesn't solve the problem. What is you're solving the problem? An app is a channel.
Yeah.
You'll figure it out. There's no code tools. There's ways to build an MVP without having to go and spend millions on solution number one. So I think that was the biggest problem, because then it was still disconnected into what we knew about the problem. And now all of a sudden we've paid so much money to develop this solution, and then you realize sooner than later, hey, the customer says they wanted pears, not apples. It's how do you revert back and say, okay, cool, let's build pears, right? So that was the big problem. We were very early in our stage. We were very early in our company for us to be investing in that type of thing, as opposed to going and speaking to customers. That is what we should have been spending more time on very early on in the business.
Do you think you learned that lesson too late? Or is that something that you're still sort of figuring it out now?
No. I'm more happy that we learned it in that way, without it being very disastrous for our business, right? Early on it would have been great if we had figured out how to build much quicker, but it didn't kill our business. Nearly did. There were very dark nights when we ran out of runway. It was hey, we wish we could have had that back. But I think it's in those moments when going back to the purpose of the business was very important, because when you don't have the capital and you don't have like anything around you that can help, throw this to the media and PR and be out there, you need to really figure it out when your customers are like, hey, we need a solution, right? You said you're promising this, like we need a solution. And that helped me really learn how to hack things together, like how to build. Like I had to be there by myself and be like, hey, like we need to build this.
Yeah.
Customer says they want it, like let's learn how to build it. And fortunately enough, like we were able to really get some business going, and again, good partners behind us, and like, look, we've overcome that hurdle, and I think it's now given us that thing early on in our journey that will help us know what to prioritize and not to prioritize in the future. So
why did you think that the dev shop was a better sort of route to take rather than building out a team? Did you think it was a lot more expensive, or was it really about trying to have a lot more speed and being able to, build out a platform that you thought, this will solve the problem a lot better, even before you had the data from, customers saying, hey, look, actually what I need is a lot more simple.
So I think it's more about the beginning of our journey and how it started that really led us to like, we have to do this. We were part of a tech competition. We got some funding from that. 3 days, like the funding landed 3 days before COVID, like the lockdown.
Ooh.
And again, the people behind this were like, you really need to get this, because PRs have really been like put on us. Like we've been in the news, we've been like, this solution is coming. And the organization that backed us was also like needing that PR, because things were happening behind closed doors that, were leading us to need to have something. So the most accelerated way, no one knew what remote work is at the time, right? I'm literally fresh out of like starting the startup. And we had to hack things together. Like there was like no time for us to still figure out, okay, cool, we're gonna do interviews and we're gonna go and like live in places. Like we don't know how to run this new way of working. And the only way we thought like, you need to have a team that already knows how to build this thing, because this thing needs to come out. You've hyped it up now. Let's get it out there. So I think what influenced us that way was really the beginning of our journey. But again, I think we learned a lot of lessons, and I'm never gonna downplay the impact it had on where we are today, because it was because of that tool. It was because of that other partners were able to back us and be like, hey, we want to work with you. We like what you're building. Build it in for this. And like today, some of the opportunities we've gotten have been based on that. So yeah, that's the reason why we went the dev shop route. But again, like in retrospect, because of how we started and what the reasons were, we've made it work.
People talk about just having partners or investors, come into your business. It does definitely accelerate your growth, and like it helps you learn from other people that might have made the mistakes already, so you don't have to make them, right? But it also invites different types of pressures. So what you're mentioning now, the money's in the bank now. Hey guys, where's the work? Where's the work? Where's the work? How much have you learned about that relationship thing, where it's like, we have a purpose, we have a vision, we have a plan. You're a partner, you're coming in, you can't change this first. We need to collaborate in order to drive, the results that we want. Yeah. But you can't now, and there's that, what's that crappy analogy about investors when investors can, at first they're hitchhikers, they come into the car, it's nice, and then they hijack it, they're like, what, when I was a driver. What did you learn about that whole relationship there?
I remember there was a conversation I had with my co-founder at the time, and it went like, I was like, this was the height of the pressure. I was like, do you know what I miss the most, man? Like, I miss the beginning phases, because then that does like no pressure. Like, I used to be able to talk about the dream and the problem and like the story without this pressure of it having to be like really be done, right? And that's like the kind of sucky part. Is like, hey, now that we have to execute on that, like, and there's like money and there's pressure behind it. Like people are saying, oh yeah, actually do the dream. Early on, like the immaturity was like, I just wish I could talk about the dream forever. And that's like, that was it. So yeah, the pressure with investment, I think, is to really prove it. But I think that's where I think it differentiates those that are really for actually solving the problems as opposed to those that are talking about it for other reasons. So again, why I always mention is that luckily our backers, the first people that invested, it was more so grant funding and wasn't an investor that's like, okay, cool, like I need capital to come out of this. But there was more so PR that needed to come out of it so they could show successes before things were happening. So the pressures, yeah, they do play a role, but I think it does also showcase those that can actually execute on the visions that they want to have and actually are focused on the problem as opposed to the hype of being a founder. It sounds cool sometimes. Hey, we starting this thing, we're going full in. It sounds so cool, right? Like, hey, you can tell people around the dinner table that you're building this tech. But if you're not really solving a real problem, then like it starts to weigh on you if like, you're not really achieving those things. And I think for us, it was at those times when we didn't have the capital that really showed that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the investment. And therefore now I'm in a very strong position to say, hey, like first and foremost, capital is cheap. I know people will say, hey, like no, capital is kind of cheap when you think about the detriment it can come with if it doesn't align with your purpose. Capital that really matters is that of people that back the vision and not your tomorrow. Like people that aren't rushing to, people that are with you on the long journey, not on the returns. That is the difference. You need to find partners that can come in and say, hey, we actually back the longer term vision and solving of the problem than we are about the capital. The capital becomes a result of you continuously tracing that. So yeah.
You talk about just how nice it is to just be a founder. It's so nice, right? You just call yourself that.
Yeah.
And already you're just in this league of like superstars. Like, no, those guys are building the future. And that's how I always think of like that word founder. It's like, this is someone that has dedicated themselves to building the future by saying there's a problem in the world and I can solve it, right? And you spoke about that whole, it's easier to talk about the dream and just be like, oh man, this is what we want to do. It's just harder when it's time for the execution. When did you get that like slap in the face on execution to say, hey bro, this ain't no game. This is real life, bro.
This is real life. 2 times. The first time maybe I didn't realize it and I took a lot more personal was when we were trying to fundraise. Like now it's like, hey, you've gotten capital and you've gotten the money to kickstart this business. But now you want venture capital that helps you accelerate and grow, right, your vision. Getting to talk to more investors and pitching them and all of that kind of stuff. There was the first slap was really like, hey, this is nice, just not for us. Right? And more that you hear that no was when you're like, hey, like maybe I'm not the guy, right? You have to question yourself that, hey, like this is so awesome. Like when we're in our like team chats, it's like, yo guys, like we got 5,000 new users overnight. Like what the hell? Like how did that happen? Like, but then you start to like have to like talk about where you're actually going and if you're really the right person. And I think that was the first time. But the second time was again when you ran out of runway at the time, really having to face it without the noise. Like no media, no social media, no nothing. Like when there's no noise, are you really about doing this? Like, are you really about it?
Yeah,
like,
when there's no attention and no one cares.
Nothing. I think people didn't realize, but there was a time when we went off social. We were very loud and we were very customer facing. Remember, we're a talent marketplace. So it's like, get talent and get supply. And for a long time, we were just focused on this side because, again, like the demand for jobs and job opportunities in general will always come. But it's until we went like stealth and we're like, okay, cool. Let's not make a noise. And let's just focus on building that. Like focus on building for the customer, which is, again, the companies and the supply side. That it made, a lot more sense because now you're just focusing on building something and naturally people came to where you were building as opposed to coming because of the noise. Right? Yeah. So, that was a real time when I had to figure it out. And then there's a second time when I third time was when we launched Soulmate, which is the other startup. It was like, okay, cool. Now you're doing the rodeo and you're more you're more doing it from the very beginning. So, yeah.
So you're talking about that, we'll go into Soulmate because I think it's like really interesting that you're working on this other thing.
Yeah.
Right? But you're talking about that, so you've got a lot of the students going into the platform, applying whatever it is, and then you've got the company side as well. Which side of this would you say is the harder play, right? Because you do need the companies putting out roles and saying, look, we want this new talent, but you also want like as much talent as you can and the best talent, thinking that this is the right platform for them to be able to, find these right opportunities.
I'll say it like this. I think we figured the harder side and the thing you should always focus on, and what we focused on, is the supply side. Like, just because you have a lot of talent on your platform, you can't manufacture jobs. Again, it's always going to be the hard work to really have to. I mean, that's what we were doing at the very beginning. Was we had these opportunities, we had a few partners, but you have a lot of people on your platform that don't fit these opportunities. So we aggregated more and more and more data so that people could still find them. Like that's really our purpose, was to help them find. But that wasn't sustainable. Like us staying up from like 6 to midnight to get opportunities and list them was every night after already pushing already like 8. Like that was not sustainable for long. So the focus should always be on the supply side. I mean, we have solid partners now, and we're really like accelerating this next quarter on getting more and more of the right partners that come with opportunities. Because naturally because it's not about just having a talent pool, it's more about having the right talent pool, right? So again, the talent will always be out, and we are about making this more accessible to everyone. But again, we always focus on trying to solve the problem for the job opportunities that do exist. Because just because you have people on your platform, you can't just manufacture job opportunities. And solving the unemployment issue is really like, it's a massive problem.
Yeah.
Big, hairy problem, but it takes a lot more than just one player. And we've realized that very early, that we can only do our part and then enable everyone else that we want to partake and partner with to solve the bigger purpose.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about South Africa's unemployment, and I call it a crisis because there's nothing else you can use. Like there is no other word to use. And anyone that uses a different word to describe it is euphemizing the problem that we have. Like, this is a crisis, right? And when you have a situation like that and you have a platform that's saying, we'll find you opportunities, obviously you guys are going to deal with a lot more noise, a lot more, there's going to be 1,000 people applying for one job, for example. And you've seen this where, I remember seeing a video on TikTok where KFC at some mall was just looking for, 2 cashiers. And there was a line of 300 people. Yeah. And that's where we are right now. Yeah. In the context of this, and you've got like corporates looking for like really, high level talent that has like, that is going to be of a high quality. What becomes the metric to try and decide, okay, this is the people that we need to make sure that the companies are seeing the most, because those are the most likely people that they'll be willing to take on? Yeah.
So, when we went into the graduate space, the graduate recruitment space, we were always about understanding why it was that some of these opportunities weren't so visible. I remember speaking to some people as we were engaging with the talent acquisition partners, and one said to me like, hey, like when we were supposed to work with them, we're like, okay, cool, we're going to push on social. They're like, no social media. Why? No, because social media means that more work for me. More applications come on my desk, more Excel spreadsheets, and like now I have to do the work if too many people come my way. And I was like, oh, okay, no. Like, if that's a problem to making things accessible, then maybe we should address that. And that like became like, hey, maybe our product should speak to the fact that it doesn't matter how many people apply. You will always find the right people. And whatever we do in the back end to make sure that you can match that on whatever criteria you have. And we're very upfront about that. We know people have their criteria. And like that should be more so in the forefront to help you vet through, as opposed to this idea that you can't have this thing accessible. So for us, the metric is always good and great matches, right? That like the number of applicants and what's the ratio of good and great, like good and great candidates. That is always the metric we use to measure of our meaningfulness to a customer or to a client is that, hey, even though we may have given you 12,000 applicants, you used to have 3,000 applicants. We've grown the applicants, but the ratio of good and great matches has now risen since we've been on board. So that's really what we're about.
And it becomes about the quality a lot more, like the filtering as well.
Yes. But again, that's also very much based on what customers perceive to be great. I mean, we've seen situations where there's cum laude students that will apply and not get a great match. And we've been asked that question, like, how did this person not make a great match? And you're like, but do you remember your scoring criteria and your measurements? That's how. Like, that number is based on how you measuring it. So let's help you better improve the way you judge candidates. And the reason why we do that is because at a certain stage, we want to remove this thing of, hey, a cum laude and this means success. It's really about, like, does everyone have an even playing field? If you may have not gotten your degree for whatever reasons, we know there's vast amount of reasons why people don't get their degrees, and financial is one of the biggest ones, right? So just because you didn't get that doesn't mean you're not a great candidate. Now, just because you don't have the degree doesn't mean you're not a great candidate. And we want to even the playing field in future by being able to help develop better ways of assessing talent and connecting them to these opportunities. So, yeah.
When you think about the work that you're doing and like how you measure whether it's growth or success, what are the key things that you look at and go, okay, this means that we're growing versus the other thing that just feels like it's feeding your ego, right?
Yeah.
I always think that entrepreneurs, when they're choosing KPIs, they choose one that's just like, I know this one, I'll hit this one.
Yeah.
It's an ego boost. I'm good. Does it actually matter to the business? I'm not sure.
Nah, yeah, I get you. Like likes and impressions.
Hey, man, don't believe the PR.
Hey, man, don't believe the PR, man. You can buy that.
Oh, damn.
The biggest metric to us is placements. That's our North Star. If we're not placing people into opportunities and we're not connecting people to opportunities, then our purpose is not being met. And we know that revenue is very aligned with our placement metric. Then for us, because we are a lot more of we have been a lot more of an enterprise business. It was contracts, average size with contracts, and understanding that, hey, you need to place X amount of people on this contract. So that has been our success metric. And revenue, it's so funny. The beginning of our story, like, revenue was the least important, right?
Yeah, but isn't that typical with startups mostly? It's like revenue comes later.
Yeah, it doesn't. Early on in our journey, it was like, how can we help like young people get opportunities, and like we'll figure out like advertising revenue when we have 1 million users. It's very important to get revenue upfront because you need to know the mechanics of your business being sustainable. There's no point of having a meaningful impact if that's not sustainable. Like, you will be a flash in the pan and you will leave people distraught after you. Like, okay, cool. There was a time when there was this amount of impact being made for 2,000 people. That thing died out 2 years ago and we've never seen it again. There's no point of that, right? Like, if you want to see impact grow, you need to be able to make it sustainable. There's no point of just throwing money into something without understanding how that money won't, not necessarily that it has to make it back, but able to pay for itself forward so that the impact is sustained for much longer than just these, I think I call it flash in the pan impact. Like, we throw money, like, it's going to happen, it happens, and then like, it's just left alone. The PR is done, the PR is nice, and then we just put it in our archives or on our webpage, but then we never continue that impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.